couple little things here is we do record these webinars, so if there is anything that you want to go back and review, we keep it on the Bass Pro OneSource website as well as on the Navionics webinar link. So you're more than welcome to go through and take a look at these webinars later. We've got quite a few others up, but this will help you to be able to go back and follow up on things that Mike had said and take notes later. If you do have questions, there's the chat button down the bottom. Anything you have, or you can even ask questions that come up during the webinar, feel free to click on that and ask any questions you want. Generally, we'll leave 20 minutes and Mike will answer any questions you've got in the last 20 minutes, and I can address those and he'll get back to you. So again, I'm going to turn this over at this point to Mike DelVisco. Mike, if you want to talk to us a little more about summer bassing, I will let you share screens and you take it from here. I'm going to turn mine off because everybody wants to watch me the entire time. I'm going to keep my mic on for a minute until we get you squared away. There you go. And just hit that down on the bottom right there, Mike. Hit that little hourglass. There you go. And that'll go full screen for you.
Which one? That one?
The third, when you got your volume one, the first one to the left. You see 80%, the little thing to the left there on your PowerPoint. That one. Hit that one. Slideshow. Nope, not that. Hit the button on the right next to that one. Ah, too big. Nope, stop moving that one. Just go right to the left of that. You got the thing that looks like a little stand. There you go. That thing right there. That one. Yep. Ah, there you go. Now we're cooking.
Wonders of modern technology.
I've done a couple of these. It's cheating. So, all right, Mike, take it away.
Very, very good, Paul. And hey, thanks for the guys at Navionics for hosting these webinars. I have a blast doing it. It's a little bit different than I usually do at sports shows traveling around the country, but this is really fun to be able to actually sit at home for about the first time in 6 months after traveling around the country and do a little seminar for you guys on summer transitions. And, you know, if any of you guys saw the last one that I did, I guess it was a little bit later, like the end of June or July of last year, we did one on summertime structure patterns, which is kind of the prelude to what I'm talking about here today. This is, if you want a really good tutorial on what happens before that other seminar, this is going to be the one. So you'll actually get this is the first part of those two. So you can jump on, like Paul said, on Navionics on the YouTube channel and check out all those videos, including my summertime structure pattern. But for now, we're going to talk about kind of summer transitions. And, you know, I've had a chance to fish quite a bit around the country here the last 6 months, and the fishing's been a little strange this year. It's been anything from really cold conditions, windy conditions, high water, low water, warming trends. There's been a lot going on around the country, not only just in the South where I live here in Tennessee, but I just got back from being up for 3 weeks up in the Northeast and fishing up there. So a lot of this stuff I'm going to tell you will apply. Some of it's already happened down here, down south, a couple of these few first things I'm going to talk to you about, but some of that could still be going on geographically depending upon where you live, and for certain up north, the Northeast, a lot of this stuff is still going on. So if I can figure out how to advance my slides here, just like that, that's pretty easy. Just click the mouse. I'm a quick learn, Paul. So first of all, the beginning of summer transition happens during the post-spawn period. And typically in the months of May through June, and maybe even into the beginning parts of July, you know, depending upon where you live geographically. Some of you guys, if you're from way up north, Minnesota, Wisconsin, which I'll actually be in a couple of weeks, a lot of this stuff will still be happening there. And typically from water temperatures that range from the low 70s to low 80s. Now here in Tennessee, I live on Douglas Lake. And I haven't had the boat on the water yet from just getting back up north. But I'm assuming that our water temperature is probably in the low 80s right now. So these first two things I want to tell you, I probably wouldn't be looking at that. But the third thing I'm going to talk to you about was something that would definitely be happening down here, down south right now. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to intercept bass from their shallow water places to where they're eventually going to be, say, next month and through August into the beginning part of September. So, where do they go and what do they do? So when the bass spawn ends, all the fish do not go directly to their summertime locations. Now, the first wave, let me back up here a little bit and say that bass don't also spawn all at the same time. So the first wave of fish that spawned here in East Tennessee could have been March. The second wave is typically April, and we actually even have a third wave of fish that spawns in May. Now, depending upon where you live, that can be pushed up a month. So, April, May into June, or if you live really far north, it could be May, June, and July. I just got back from Maine. I spent the last 3 weeks up there, and there was still fish, even though I was fishing there in mid-June, a few were finished, some were coming up, some were pre-spawned, some were spawning, some were post-spawned. So there's a lot of different things going on at the same time. And holds true for down in the south, that not all fish spawn at the same time. So there's going to be multiple things happening. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to intercept these fish along the way, and that's critical to your success out in the water. So I'm going to go under the assumption that by the end of May, beginning of June, we're going to all be in that severely post-spawn situation where the fish aren't super deep yet, but they're not where they spawned. So how do we figure out how to catch them along the way? And I'm going to come back to this particular little slide here a little bit later, because there's a lot of stuff happening on here that, will really key me into catching some fish. So there's a couple little patterns that happen. And for the most part, both of these have finished down south right now. But, in the middle portion of the U.S. and the upper portion of the U.S., there's going to be a lot of this stuff happening. Now, shad spawn. Now, shad don't live in every single body of water, but if you fish a body of water that has a shad spawn, when that water temperature reaches 70 degrees, and a stable 70 degrees, not so much the first time it gets to 70 degrees, but it's got to be stable for, I would say, at least a good week or 10 days, and then those shad will start to spawn. And this typically occurs when the last wave of fish finish spawning. Now, for us, it started happening late May, middle to late May into June, and it'll last probably a few weeks until that water temperature really gets to be, mid to upper 70s, and then the shad finish spawning. And it usually happens very, very early in the morning. The shad will spawn during the very low light conditions, which makes it extremely effective those first couple hours of the day. And also, if you've got some cloudy conditions, you don't have the sunshine. If the sun's shining, those first 2 hours of the morning are really, really important. But if you've got some cloud cover, it will prolong that, maybe an hour. You might get another hour till about 9 or maybe even 9:30 out of it until the shad, finish for the day, and they'll go ahead and start that whole routine overnight again. Prime cover could be a variety of different things, and this cover, and actually I should say the shad spawn will sometimes change locations from day to day. You may find them one day on riprap and the next day around some trees, or one day on lily pads and the next day around, boat docks. So it changes, but all of that different type of cover, riprap, bushes, docks, lily pads, and other vegetations are really key places where those shad will push right up. They'll spawn, and the bass, I guarantee you, will be there, right there feeding on them. It's a really, really fun pattern to exploit. Not a lot of patterns, sometimes that people really key in on, because sometimes they miss it. If they don't get out there first thing in the morning, or they don't maybe go to the right area and they're spawning somewhere else, then they'll miss it. And you can really kind of stumble upon them. And that happened to me. Quick story, in a Bassmaster tournament on Lake Eufaula in late May, early June, 5 or 6 years ago. And I had one particular little stretch of lily pads and grass and, some little down trees that I had driven past every single day in practice and never stopped on. And little did I know the shad spawn was going on right there. I had another place that I wanted to start at, but I had a bad draw, so I figured I'd just start pretty close. And it was literally a half a mile from our takeoff, and I pulled in there, and the shad were spawning, and the bass were in there. And I wasn't leading the tournament the first day, but I was in second or third place, I believe, all because I made one quick little stop. The rest of the event, I had to kind of scramble around, got a late draw another day, so I kind of missed it again, and got an early draw the next day and caught them real good. So change your areas. Don't be, pigeonholed into looking at one specific type of area. Boat docks are another great area for the shad spawn. And when you think about this, it's not necessarily relegated towards shallow water as well, because I've caught them on really, really deep docks, 40, 50 foot on those real deep, fluffy banks that have those big boathouse docks, and those shad will be running around the edge of the docks and spawning first thing in the morning. So it's a great way to catch them too, around boat docks or riprap or any other types of covers. So that's a really, really cool pattern. And as far as baits, pretty simple. I'm looking to really get a reaction out of these fish. I really want to try to catch as many as I can very quickly too. So I want to use baits that I can fish fast. So I want to fish, obviously a buzzbait is one of my favorite baits to fish, not only for the shad spawn, but all throughout the year. That it's just a great bait for triggering big fish into biting. And a spinnerbait is another thing too, because that's going to really mimic the shad. And I'm going to pick more natural colors in my spinnerbaits, whites, or if the water's got a slight dinge to it, I want to go to a white and chartreuse, but mostly, shad type patterns with willow leaf blades too. I like that willow leaf blade because it has the same profile as the shad and the bait fish the fish are feeding on. So it just really mimics that closely, and gives off a little bit more flash and a little bit less vibration, which is really essential when you're fishing a spinnerbait too as well. And I'll come back and tell you one more thing with the spinnerbait. But the other thing too is a swim jig, which is kind of a really good alternative, especially if the fish get up in that cover. They're around some lily pads and things like that. A little 1/4 ounce or 3/8 ounce swim jig with a little Yamamoto double tail trailer. You can just fire that out and just kind of swimming along the lily pads. And it's a really subtle, a lot more subtle than the buzzbait or the spinnerbait, for being able to generate a few more strikes. And sometimes what I like to do is I like to go through the area initially with my buzzbait first, try to get a couple of the real aggressive fish, and then go back through it with the spinnerbait and try to catch a few more, and then come back through it as the sun's starting to come up a little bit and those fish are getting a little bit more spooky and starting to back off. I can turn back around that same area instead of running to another place and throw my swim jig and catch a few more. But if they're on and they're really on a bank, you're going to catch a whole bunch really, really fast. It's a quick deal, and a real fun way to fish. But one thing about a spinnerbait too, and I get this question a lot about how to fish a spinnerbait. And a lot of guys have spinnerbaits and they fish them, but they don't catch a ton of fish on them. And it's absolutely one of my favorite baits to trigger a strike from the fish. And there's two things you really got to do with a spinnerbait. Number one is get your blades turning right away. The quicker you can get your blades turning, the better chances you'll have of catching fish. And you want to place your spinnerbait in and around the target or the cover that you're fishing. So if I'm fishing, say a little patch of lily pads or a little patch of grass, I'm not going to throw 10 or 20 feet past that piece of cover. I want to throw that bait and get it to drop right next to the cover, and then turn my reel handle and get my blade spinning right away, because you will catch a ton of fish on the first or second crank fishing a spinnerbait if you get the blades turning right away, because it catches those fish off guard. They bite it before they ever know what it is. The second thing with a spinnerbait is doing something different with your bait. Now, a lot of times you'll get bit just throwing it out and winding it in. Other times you need to really trigger those fish into biting. So a lot of times what I'll do is I'll throw slightly past the cover, maybe a foot and a half past the cover. I'll give my bait a couple of cranks till it meets the cover, and then I'll shake my rod tip a little bit, or I'll stop my bait totally so those blades give off a little bit different vibration in the water than they would have if I was just throwing it out and winding it in. You can do that not only with a spinner bait, but a variety of virtually every other bait that you throw. Always remember to try to get your bait to do different things to catch a few more fish. So that's my shad spawn choices. And then pretty much after, 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning, the fishing gets really, really tough. So you got to try to grind a few more out and figure out some ways to catch them. Maybe you can go and fish for some fish that have already finished spawning and are already out in some of that intermediate stuff, which we'll see here just in a little bit. So you'll have some choices after the shad spawn, but that's one thing. If you guys are in the right territory, right geographic place right now, I would give that a try. So there's another thing that goes on, and this was actually happening in Maine when I was there last week, and I'm sure it's happening in a lot of other places too, and it may even still be happening down here down south, because a lot of times, even though our water is getting close to 80 degrees, those bluegills will keep spawning. Sometimes they'll actually have a summer spawn too, and there'll be a whole bunch of bluegill up shallow. I can think of one lake in particular, Lake Wiley in South Carolina, where it's not uncommon to find bluegill still spawning in mid-June to late June to the beginning of July, and they'll be around, certain types of cover and boat docks and places like that. But it typically happens, again, when the water temperature reaches the low 70s, and again at the end of the bass spawn. And typically on shallow, sandy flats, weedy areas, the backs of coves, in and around boat docks, any pretty much flat, shallow, sandy area, that's where the bluegill are going to spawn. They'll spawn in clusters, so there won't be just, one bluegill spawning in an area. There may be 25, 30, 40, 50 bluegill spawning in one pocket or one cove. So it's the type of pattern that, when those fish, especially the big fish, when they finish spawning and they don't go directly out to some deep water, they're looking for a big meal. They're looking to feed up. And prime deal is to fish around the bluegill spawn. And this is another pattern that not a lot of guys think of. The post-spawn time of a bass doesn't have to be a really hard time of the year to fish. It just, you can exploit these two patterns, the shad spawn pattern and the bluegill pattern, and catch a ton of fish. And the bluegill pattern is something that you will catch a lot of big fish. And you may not catch a ton of fish from one area, but if you've got enough spots where the bluegill are spawning, you'll be able to catch a ton of big fish during the course of the day. You may only catch one or two from each spot, but you can go ahead and rotate around some areas and catch a bunch of fish. So it's a really another cool pattern that I like to fish, and one that's probably happening right now. So we take a look at some of the baits, and this is another thing about post-spawn fishing a lot of times too, is that a lot of people like to fish underneath the fish during post-spawn, and I'm a firm believer that the real big fish do not go and sit on the bottom when they're post-spawn. They're looking to feed. They're looking up, and a bass, especially a big bass, is always going to typically look up when he feeds. So topwater baits, whether it be topwater frogs or walking baits or prop baits, those are my three favorite post-spawn baits when I'm looking to target fish that are suspended, and also target them when they're on the bluegill beds. They're three baits that I can throw a long distance, and that's a consideration too when you're up in that really, really shallow water. These bluegills spawn in 1.5 to 2 foot deep, so I need to stay away from that fish. I don't want to spook that fish. He's pretty wary to begin with, and I need to stay away from him to be able to, entice a few more bites and get him. So, because if I spook those bluegills too, more than likely the fish is going to spook too. So I don't want to do that. I want to fish from a distance, and fishing the frog and fishing the walking bait and fishing the prop bait, all in bluegill type patterns. You notice all three of these have a bluegill type pattern, is really the way to go. And a good follow-up bait too is this deal right here. And I've caught a ton of fish this spring so far on the old trusty Senko. it's just a bait that, where I was using the swim jig to try to catch a few more fish during the shad spawn, that's going to be kind of my backup bait. Typically a green pumpkin or a watermelon red flake, or actually another color, which is green pumpkin, purple green, looks a lot like a bluegill. Great choice for being able to catch a few more fish. I'm fishing it weightless, I'm fishing it weedless style, so I can throw it out and just kind of let it fall naturally, and you'll get a ton of bites during that, doing that as well. So pretty simple deal. Shad spawn, bluegill spawn, something to really take advantage of until the water gets, to the mid to upper 70s and those fish start to move out from some of those shallower places. So what are the next steps? Shallow or deep? It's decision time now. So after the post spawn's done and you've done the shad spawn deal and the bluegill spawn deal, and you're pretty convinced that stuff is done as well, and you're not catching quite as many fish as you were the week before or the week before that, water temperature is going to get into the upper 70s now to the low 80s, so it's time to make a decision. What do I do? And I'm a firm believer that not every single fish goes out deep. There's going to be a pretty big majority of them that do. Maybe 75% of the fish will start heading out deep. Now, like I said in the beginning, they don't get there all of a sudden. They're going to use places to stop along the way. I'm also a believer that there's another group of fish that just stay shallow. And this depends upon a lot of the type of lake that you fish. There may even be a bigger portion of fish that stay shallow if it's a fairly shallow body of water to begin with, as opposed to a place like Douglas Lake where I live, where, there's, I'm sure, a big group of fish right now that's probably out in the, 25 to 30, 35 foot of water. There's going to be places around the country in certain lakes where they just don't go deep. So having options is really, really key. And we'll see that here in a little bit, but select areas with the best potential. We're going to see a couple different slides here. And when I'm trying to figure out where to go fish, and this is where, my Lowrance Electronics and my Navionics chip really, really comes in handy, is that I can distinguish these areas while I'm out there on the fly, on the water beforehand, and have a game plan of where I want to go and fish. Now, if I'd been fishing on a certain body of water for a period of time, maybe through the pre-spawn into the spawn, now through the post-spawn, I've pretty much got a general area of where the fish had been. So I can pretty much backtrack or plan ahead of where they're going to be. So if I hadn't been on the water, then I'm going to kind of pick areas with the best potential. Now, there's a lot of things happening here. That we've got, a pocket up here and another pocket up here, and then a big flat right here where, these fish could spawn all throughout this area right here. And then shift out and start moving out to some areas like underwater points, little humps like this, little ditches like this right here and here, and also humps like that. So we've got a lot of stuff that happens all within one general area, and that's what I'm really looking at. If I just had a couple of pockets in the middle of nowhere in a big giant flat, probably wouldn't be much to my advantage to go and fish those spots right now, or fish the transition places where those fish are going to go right now, because there's probably not going to be as much. Here I've got greater potential of catching fish, because all those fish need to do is scoot out of here, out of this flat, and be right here in this underwater point before they'll eventually get out on this real deeper section right here. We'll come back to, I click on it, we'll get back to that one. So where are we looking at here for interception points heading into deep water, like I was talking about? And there's, in my opinion, there's three really good ones: humps and rock piles, underwater points, and ditches. And the best structures will always have irregular features. Now this, whether you're fishing deep stuff, shallow stuff, it doesn't really matter. Any type of structure that you're fishing, if it has irregular features, it's going to be a pretty good place to start fishing. And that's a lot of times what we look at when we're trying to dissect areas, or what I should call the pattern within a pattern. So let me put this into perspective a little bit. If you're fishing a weed bed and that weed bed is a mile long and you don't get bit for the first 40 minutes or so, and then all of a sudden you run into a little area and you catch 5 or 6 fish in a row, I'm going to pay real close attention to, number one, what the bottom looks like. Is it a hard bottom? Is it a soft bottom? Was there a little ditch that ran through? Was it a change in depth? What was it? Was it a mixture of different kinds of grass all of a sudden? Was it maybe some harder type features, like maybe some brush or some stumps involved or rocks or whatever it might be? There's something that's different between that one tiny little area and the whole mile's worth of grass that you fished. There was some irregular feature that draws those fish to that area, and that's where they'll be located. And that's one of the keys to fishing any type of spot, whether it be a shallow spot or a real deep spot, is that you need irregular features. So if you think about that slide, and I'm pretty sure I go back to it again here in a minute, with that underwater point, if I see irregular features on that underwater point, like rocks or a rock pile or some stumps or brush, things like that, that's going to be the stuff that I'm going to absolutely key on. But I want it to be with any spot in close proximity to the shallow water where they spawned, being that it be a cove, a pocket, a bay, a flat, whatever it happens to be. And also in close proximity to the deep water, which is where they're going to go. So what I'm doing is I'm picking not so much super deep areas, say, anything under 20 feet, but I want the first available distinct piece of cover away from where they were shallow, but before they're going to be deep. And that's the stuff that I'm going to target and try to fish. So that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to intercept these bass before they get out deep on these little stopping points before they move out. So here's another slide right here that's a pretty big hump that's got a lot of pockets, one big one, a bunch of small secondary ones. And I'll tell you one thing about the late spawning fish that may spawn in May or June or even July, depending upon you live, is that a lot of those fish are going to be main lake oriented too. So I would look a lot of times for those fish to be spawning in these main lake pockets, as opposed to way back up in here, up in these creeks. These may be the first fish that spawn, say in March and April in the warmer southern states. But then as the lake heats up a little bit and some of those real deep fish start to realize that it's springtime, they're going to move up into these main lake pockets and spawn. And that's something that a lot of guys miss too. They think that every fish has to spawn way back up in the backs of a creek, or way back up in here, and that's the only place they spawn. A lot of times I'm looking for main lake pockets or even main lake stretches too. It doesn't necessarily have to be a pocket. They'll spawn right on main lake stuff, and then they'll head out. But humps are a great place for the fish to move up and feed on while being close to deep water. And if we see this next one now, I used this slide last year in my summertime deal because it's a really good representation of something that I'm looking at when I'm looking for a hump. I like to pay attention to these contour lines, and having that platinum chip in my unit, I'm able to see that 1 foot interval that really gives me the detail that I want. So this real sharp drop right here is going to be something that the fish will key in on, as opposed to this whole other thing, which is more of a gradual slope. It's really pretty steep right here. So that's going to be as far as dissecting the hump, like I said, the pattern within the pattern, that's going to be the stuff. If you want to catch some fish quick, and I looked at this, that's where I'm going to be targeting my emphasis, right there on that sharp drop. They may not be on this drop, they may be up on the top, but they'll probably be on that side as opposed to this other side. So that's one thing you want to do when you're paying attention, especially to these type key areas, is just look for something that's different and something that will hold fish. So here's the other slide that I wanted to show you guys on deeper points or underwater points, not necessarily points that you visibly see with your eyes, but an underwater point that leads out into deeper water. And this one has rocks on it, and I can get my unit dialed in. And I'll tell you one thing about, if you guys are running a Lowrance machine, go to your advanced sonar settings and adjust two things. Adjust your color line. I like mine at about 71 to 72%. And I will sometimes also adjust my sensitivity. Now, usually when I adjust sensitivity on my unit, I let it typically run in automatic mode, but I will absolutely adjust it up or down depending if I'm shallow or deep. And the shallower I go, I want to decrease my sensitivity to let me see the bottom and be able to see the fish a little bit more clearly. If I get in real deep water, I want to increase that sensitivity to be able to see what's going on. Like these rocks, you can see with the combination of having my sensitivity set the right way and my color line set at about 71 to 72%, I can see these rocks and kind of see the individual outline of these rocks. Wherever this red, and this is a color pattern palette, I believe this is the first or second one on the scale, and that's that yellow-red palette. And wherever I see the red and the yellow kind of combine, that's the top of a rock. So pretty hard stuff right here. Here's another rock. There's another rock right there. Here's another one here. And I can kind of see the individual shading right here, and then also right here and right here, that it's a rock pile. So it's important to set your unit up the right way so you can see the particular stuff that you want to see. It's simple as that. And just getting out there and becoming familiar with it, especially fishing deeper water, because your sonar is your only eyes when you're out there in the water, and lets you see things as they truly are. So that's one of the things I really want to look at, is that underwater points with structure on them. It could be brush piles, it could be rocks, it could be, a variety of different stuff, stumps, but rocks on the end of a point, great place to start looking for some fish. So here's another thing too, ditches. And on Douglas Lake, where I live, we have a ton of these little pockets with ditches in it. And I actually just got back from Kentucky Lake. Well, it's been a few weeks now. Right before the main trip, I was on Kentucky Lake fishing an FLW tournament, and those fish were starting to migrate. They're actually migrating in two different directions. They were migrating in and migrating out both at the same time, because the water was coming up, fish were finished spawning, they were starting to move out. And ditches played a really big role into what I was doing. So I was, every place or every little pocket that I tried to go locate had to have a ditch running in. And they're really desirable migration routes for bass when they start traveling shallow to deep. It's the highway that they use to move in shallow to spawn, to move out deep, and also in the fall they're going to move back in again. So they use those ditches year round to move up and down. It also provides a real quick way for the bass to change its position in the water column. So if we get boating pressure, fishing pressure, all of these things, bright bluebird skies, cold fronts, all of these things that attribute to how well fish bite or how well they don't bite, and actually where they move throughout the day. They want to move up and down in the water column. Sometimes they want to be slightly deeper, sometimes they want to be slightly shallower. So having that ditch running through a particular area really gives the fish some options as far as as opposed to just a big flat area where they have nowhere to go. Ditches really present an awful lot of different opportunities for the fish to move up and down. And actually the best ones that I find are some that have grass or rocks or some kind of trash. We have a lot of logs and branches and trash and stuff that floats down the lake because I live on a drawdown lake. So in the springtime, they bring that water up. So it's full pool right now, but as it was coming up, a lot of that trash just kind of floats around and it deposits in the backs of these pockets. So you'll get, trash that'll build up and You know, sometimes people plant brush piles and things like that, and they're great feeding ambush points. So if you can find ditches with all those types of characteristics, you've got a really good place to start catching some fish. So here's a slide from Kentucky Lake, and again, you know, having that Navionics chip in my unit lets me locate all these little ditches really, really quickly. So I don't have to go driving around, not knowing where I'm driving. I can go in and pull right into a pocket, you know, like this one or this one down the bottom, and being able to follow that ditch right in. And this one in particular right here, you see that little knob that kind of goes in. That's stuff, especially in my tournament a few weeks ago, that I had it narrowed down. And again, this goes back to the pattern within the pattern deal, that maybe not every pocket's going to have fish in it. Just because it's got a ditch doesn't mean it's going to have fish. So you might not have any here. You may have just a couple here. But if you get to this place right here where this little ditch or this little back creek channel runs or extends out past the pocket, that was the key for me finding some of the better fish. And I'm not 100% sure why that was. I just noticed that I happened to come across one that had that kind of characteristic, and I noticed there was bigger fish there. So I specifically started looking around the lake now for more little pockets with a little ditch or a creek channel that comes in that protruded back in. And maybe it was just because it offered the fish a little bit more security. There was a little bit more cover. There was a little bit deeper water. It could have been a temperature thing too. Who knows? But all I know is everyone that I found that was like that had a little bit better fish in it. So that's what I was kind of keying in on. But ditches are really, really good ways to be able to get on some fish, stay on some fish. And then, you know, what'll happen is that they'll migrate out into this stuff. So you may not catch them way up here shallow. They may be out migrating back out to maybe where these two ditches join. Could be an intersection point. That's another kind of deal with ditches, that anywhere they intersect to, you'll be able to find a bunch of fish. And especially if there's a roadbed, see the roadbed that comes across, you may not catch any fish right here in this portion of it. But as soon as you get to this portion and this portion right here, or that portion and that portion, you catch fish here, 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 here. So it's just finding that little key, that little pattern within the pattern. That takes a little bit of time, a little bit of map study, a little bit of looking at your electronics and trying to figure out how to catch a few more fish, and let the fish tell you what they want. Each day could be a little bit different. Some days they may move up shallow, other days they might move out. They might change locations on the cover. They may be out on the deep end. They may not be up on top of the cover one day. They may be out on the sides. But, you know, for the most part, in that time period between late post-spawn and their real summertime places where they hang out, they'll be around this cover for a pretty good amount of time. So bait choices, again, for looking deep, it's pretty simple. I'm fishing a variety of reaction baits, and then I'm fishing a variety of baits that I can slow down and work the bottom. And, you know, you saw that with the shad spawn stuff. I'm going to start with a buzzbait and then go to a spinnerbait and then go to a swim jig to try to catch a few more fish. I may start the bluegill spawn with the frog and then go to the walker and then go to the prop bait and then go to the Senko, or start with a couple of those baits and go to the Senko. So I'm always starting out with baits that I can get a reaction from the fish first, because not always when you're fishing, whether it's summertime or spring or fall, whenever it happens to be, they're not always biting your baits because they're hungry. A lot of times they're biting your baits out of reflex. And I want to start with something and I get a reflective strike out of the fish. I want them to react. So I may start with a topwater bait first thing in the morning and try to exploit some of those fish that are up high in the water column that might have been feeding, you know, up first. and try to catch a few of those. And this time of year, you can always catch a few fish, especially some that are up there schooling first thing in the morning. And fish a walking type bait, a topwater. This is a Storm Arashi topwalker. It's got a really big profile. It's going to draw fish up and get them to strike. So that's typically what I like to start with, is some type of a topwater bait, and it may even be a popper too. But the walking bait, for some reason, draws a ton of fish up to it. And then I may go to a crankbait, and I've got several here. Some of these are DT14s, and these are DT10s. And depending upon the depth of water that I'm fishing, and I'm trying to target stuff this time of year. Now, this is, of course, dependent upon the type of lake that you fish. Some of your shallow bodies, more shallower bodies of water, may only be 8 or 10, 12-foot deep max where you're targeting these fish. Others might be 12, 14, 16 feet. So I'm going to let the crankbait, or actually the depth of the water, dictate what size crankbait I fish. If I'm fishing the shallower stuff, 8 or 10 foot, then I'm going to fish that DT10. If I'm fishing 12 or 14 feet, then I want to go with a DT14, or maybe even up to a DT16, a little bit bigger profile bait, dives 16 feet. And one thing you want to really pay attention to when you're fishing a crankbait is you always want to pick a bait that goes slightly deeper than the water that you're targeting, because you want to get that bait to get down there fairly quick, and you want it to stay down in the bottom as well for as long as it can possibly stay down there before it turns back up and starts coming up. Because most of the bites you're going to get happen in two places fishing a crankbait. They happen as it's digging the bottom and bouncing off that cover, and they happen the minute that bait turns back up and tries to come back up and change its location, because it's the bass senses that whatever that prey is trying to get away. It's trying to circle out and circle back up. And that's a lot of times when they strike. You don't get a bite immediately as you're digging the bottom, for as long as that crankbait's digging. As soon as you stop feeling contact with the bottom with your crankbait, a lot of times what I like to do is stop my bait. Like if I get 1 or 2 cranks out of that bait after it's stopped hitting the bottom, I stop my retrieve, and that's when I get bit. So it goes back to what I was talking about with the spinnerbait a little while ago, that not all fish bite your bait as you're just strictly winding it in. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll bite it when it's doing different things. So bouncing along the bottom, acting very erratically, ricocheting off of different pieces of cover, trigger strikes, and then also as it starts to turn back up and you stop your retrieve and that bait stops dead, that's another thing that triggers those fish into bite your bait. So I want to pick a bait depending upon my depth range of the water that I'm fishing, and let the bait hit the bottom. So it may be a DT10, DT14, DT16. I usually save the DT20s for after those fish when they get out and they're actually on their real summertime stuff. The 16 and the 20 does a great job for there. So primarily mid-depth crankbaits work great. And then 2 other things that I like. I like throwing a football jig, which we've got down here in the bottom with a little twin tail grub on the back. And that's a great crawfish imitator that I can work along the bottom, try to catch a few more fish that weren't quite as aggressive to eat either my topwater bait or my crankbait, and I can milk that spot and catch a few more fish, especially as the sun starts to come up and those fish start to settle in. They start to maybe back down from the mid depths of the water column or right up on top of that area, and they start to get off on the sides a little bit, and they start to get just a little bit more lethargic. They're not biting quite as well. That football jig really gets me a few more strikes. And also some kind of big worm. This is one of the new Yamamoto cuttail, 6 3/4 inch cuttail worm. It's a little bit meatier than the regular cuttail. It's slightly longer, 6 3/4 inches. It's a fairly big profile bait that I can fish, on a 1/4 ounce or 3/8 ounce worm weight with a 4/0 hook, and be able to show the fish a little bit something different as well there too. So sometimes too, on retrieve, it's typically fairly standard. You're moving your bait along the bottom, but I found too that sometimes a straight drag works really, really good for triggering fish, especially with this football jig, as opposed to hopping the bait along the bottom. A lot of times just kind of dragging it along really, really slow and letting that bait get in and around that cover and let you feel the cover as well too. Really helps you get a lot more strikes. I've seen times when the fish just will not bite your bait if you hop it along the bottom, but once you start dragging it, then they start to bite it. So remember that. Just try some different retrieves. Keep your stuff simple. We got topwater baits, crankbaits, worms, and jigs ready to go fish that kind of intermediate stuff. So how about if you don't want to fish some deep stuff, or you're really not convinced that they go deep? And I am a firm believer that not every fish in the lake goes deep. Certain places, Kentucky Lake, they're going to go deep. Douglas Lake, where I live, majority of those fish right now are probably deep, but I can guarantee you there's going to be a bunch of them that still stay shallow. That's the cool thing about fishing Douglas Lake, is that you can catch a 20-pound bag up shallow, you can catch a 20-pound bag out deep. And a lot of times, the cool thing about exploiting shallow water patterns this time of year is that not a lot of people are doing it. So you've got that whole school or batch of fish, or many places or different places that you've got to go. You've got those fish all to yourself. Nobody's fishing for them. Everybody's out, deep diving crankbaits, fishing this real deep stuff right now, because a lot of the fish that have finished spawning those first waves or second waves, they're already out here. But that third wave of fish, maybe they're out here, maybe they're out on some of this. This is that same slide we saw before. So maybe they're out on this deeper point right here, or this hump, or these couple of humps out here. Maybe that's where they're going to be at. Looking at that slide before, throwing your DT10s or DT16s, football jig or worm, and that's where there's a bunch of fish at. But there could be equally a large number of fish up here in this stuff. And again, going back to my Navionics chip, it's going to show me things like boat docks, great places to go look for fish that finished spawning out here. Maybe they were on the bluegill spawn or the shad spawn on some of this stuff right here, or maybe even around some of these boat docks too, and they just kind of stay put. So boat docks are really good areas for being able to target fish this time of year. It's shade, it's protection, it's cover. Water's typically a little bit cooler. They've got food there, and it's a great place to catch a big bass that people really aren't exploiting right now. Other areas like this first initial drop off of this real shallow water right here in this 8 to 10 foot deep, great place to look for brush piles that are out off of these, flats and coves and things like that. That first initial 8 to 10, 12 foot of water, look for brush piles, little ditches like this little ditch right here. There's a little underwater ditch. Could be brush piles in here, could be some brush piles there. So there's a lot of stuff to look at when you're looking at different shallow water types of places. And the one thing about shallow water stuff too, and it goes for deep water as well, or deeper water, is that bigger fish are really territorial. So if you've got a certain place, let's say in between this pocket and this pocket right here on this flat, there was a big giant tree that had fallen in the water, and it's the only tree on this entire bank. That's going to be something that I'm really going to key in on as far as holding a big fish, because big fish like isolated pieces of cover, and that's what makes brush piles really good too, because there could be big fish located. If there's brush piles out here, they could be on that stuff. If you look at these docks, fairly small dock, there's a fairly small one, there's a fairly small one. This one right here is a big one, like a big boathouse dock. Yeah, you fish in boathouses, and this goes back to that pattern within a pattern again, but this could be slightly deeper water, it could be more shade, more protection. You could catch small fish off of these docks and catch big ones off of that one. So it's just all trying to figure out where the better fish are located and fishing through stuff to try to figure things out. And that's all fishing is putting together the pieces of this puzzle to figure out how to catch more fish, try to figure out how to catch bigger fish, and try to be more successful out there in the water. So last minute, I kind of decided to throw this slide back in. We saw this at the very beginning, but there's a lot of stuff happening here. We've got a fairly big, and actually, I live right there, so I get to look at this stuff all the time. That is my house right there on the lake. There's a fairly big, and this is a fairly deep water pocket, actually. It doesn't, this front part is really deep, and this back part, there's a creek channel that runs all the way through this thing. And these fish will spawn all back in here. Maybe the first wave of fish spawns back in here, like I mentioned at the beginning. First wave of fish will spawn back here. Second wave of fish might spawn up in this kind of more main lake pocket, or back in here, or back in this little pocket over here, and then start to migrate out. And we have a big flat area off of here with a pretty sharp drop on it. So, and an underwater little point right here. A little ditch right here in the middle, like almost like a little saddle. And those fish will really get on that little saddle, because it's something that's a little bit different. It's kind of a migration area. You've got a little slope on this end and a little slope on that end, and a little deep saddle or ditch right there in the middle. That's a really, really key spot for being able to catch some fish. And then all those, says hazard area. Right now it's not a hazard area because it's in about 20 foot of water, but a big old flat right here, or a hump on the outside of this. So, and then some boat docks up here. So there's a lot of different opportunity within this one area to be able to catch a ton of fish. Number one, that are already way out and on some of this deeper, real summertime deep water pattern right now. Some of the very first fish that spawn could already be, or I'm sure are, way out here right now. Some of the fish that finish spawning in the last wave of fish that typically happens here on Douglas Lake, probably the third week of May. It's not uncommon to find them still spawning here then. Those fish will go bluegill spawn, shad spawn, that kind of thing, and they'll start meandering out and getting on some of this stuff. And then some of them go that way to the deep stuff, and others go this way. So having this one area, and I wanted to bring this slide back up for one reason, and that's one of the very first slides that we saw that had the slide on maximizing your area and being able to pick the best potential spots. This area right here has a ton of potential no matter what you like to fish. If you like real shallow water stuff, you can catch some fish real shallow. If you like intermediate stuff, you've got that too. If you like real deep stuff, you've got that. Everything in between, you could fish 5 different patterns all in this one whole area without having to go move and go run to a ton of different places all in one day. There's a lot of different stuff to fish. And you notice that I've got some things, a couple of things marked. There's a little rock edge on this. It's pretty much sandy all throughout this area, and there's a little rock edge right here that those fish will gravitate towards, and I've put some marks on. And while I'm thinking about this, and I probably should have put a slide up about that as well, but I didn't think to do it until just now, is that I've really got into a habit on my saving waypoints and saving places of utilizing the touchscreen. Now I run a Gen 3 touch machine, and the amount of time that machine saves me, I don't know what you guys are using, if you're using keypad machines or Lowrance or whoever else, but on my touch machine, it saves me a ton of time being able to save waypoints. Now you can go in and save a waypoint and just call it a number, and then hopefully you remember what it is. Or you can go and call it something like rock. So what I can do is I can go ahead and touch my my waypoint save screen, and it comes up with a little panel, and then within that panel I'll have this number, 549 or whatever number you happen to be on at that time. You can go ahead and click that panel, and it brings up a little keyboard that you can enter in anything you want. So I can call it rock, I can call it brush, I can call it docks, I can call it grass, I can call it logs, stumps, whatever. And the other thing I can do too is I can give it a different color. There's a little wheel that you can designate colors to different waypoints. And I've gotten in the habit a lot recently of calling all my different waypoints different colors, like all my rocks might be blue. Actually, I've changed them all to red, rock for red, grass for green, brush piles are purple, something else might be yellow, and so on and so forth. So what that does is it not only helps me sort my waypoints out, but if I get on a specific pattern, say a boat dock pattern, and I know all my boat docks are blue, let's say, I can run to all my blue designated waypoints and bypass the purple ones or the green ones or the red ones. I'm fixated or focused on the blue ones. So it helps me save a lot of time when I'm running around fishing a specific pattern. It helps me organize my waypoints a whole lot better and helps me stay more efficient out in the water. So just a little thing that I just happened to think about. And I wish I threw that slide in because I could have brought you guys through how to exactly do that. But if you're using a Lowrance touch machine, hit your little flag waypoint, you'll see that box, like the dialog box that comes up. Just tap on the whatever number is at the top of the screen. It brings up a menu. It's really, really simple, really straightforward, and easy to do. So just like we had shad spawn gear, frog, bluegill spawn gear, and deep gear, we got shallow stuff too. And I keep this really, really simple. Again, I like reaction baits. I like to start off with something reaction style. And a square boat crankbait is a really, really good bait to trigger fish into biting, especially when they're on shallow water, wood cover. There's probably no better triggering bait than a square boat crankbait. And I like shad type patterns, but I really like something that's got a little bit of chartreuse orange inlet. It kind of looks like a bluegill or some other type of fish that's still up shallow the bass are feeding on. And typically by this time the water's got a little bit of color to it too. It's not quite as clear as it was in the springtime. It's got a little dinge to it. So I want to use a bait that's got a little color in it as well. Couple of the follow-up baits. I got a little 3/8 ounce skirted jig with a double tail, the Yamamoto double tail in the back, pretty simple. And then some kind of bait to flip either around stumps or logs or shallow water bushes or things like that. It's a Flappin Hog, which is a great creature style bait. Just simply fished on a tungsten worm weight with an offset worm hook. Really, really simple stuff to be able to target those shallow water fish. So pretty simple stuff. So let's review here real quick, and then we can go take some questions. If we still got some time for that. I noticed that it's about 8:05. So
yeah, I was letting you roll. I was letting you roll for a little while there, Mike. I couldn't interrupt you, man. You were just piling it right out. It was good stuff.
Yeah, no problem. And we've done this in the past too, is that if we don't get to everybody's questions, I will personally answer everybody's questions. And Paul, you can jump in if that's still the case, that we can do that. But I will certainly answer everybody's question personally if I don't get to all of them. But reviewing real quick, recognizing these subtle patterns, the shad spawn and the bluegill pattern. And unfortunately, for where I live right now, I can't take advantage of the shad spawn anymore because it's done. But, I may go, if I get a chance to get out there tomorrow or Saturday, Sunday, I may go look and try to go find some bluegill spawn. And I'm sure there probably still is some somewhere down south here, and especially a lot of you guys that live in the middle portion of the country and certainly up in the Northeast or the northern states, that's going to happen. If it's not happening right now, it will be pretty soon. So take advantage of that and take the time to locate good areas like I mentioned before. Think back to that slide that had a lot of multiple opportunities, shallow water stuff, backwater pockets, boat docks, ditches, humps, and then deep drops. It's got everything all in one area. So if you locate stuff like that, you've got a really, really good chance of catching fish in a multiple of different ways. Fish a variety of baits. Don't just rely on one thing, and you know, start with, you know, your aggressive baits first, and then slow down to some you know, more subtle baits that are going to get you a few more strikes. Instead of, you know, burning all your gas and running all around the lake, you can take advantage of a spot and really milk it and try to, you know, figure out those key subtleties of when those fish bite using different baits and a variety of baits. Don't be afraid to try shallow patterns too. And as much of a deep water lake as Douglas is, and that's what you hear this time of year, guys, you know, fishing big crankbaits and spoons and other things like that, and big swim baits. I really, really enjoy fishing this lake shallow during the summertime, just for something a little bit different to do. So don't be automatically, you know, certain that every fish goes deep, because they don't, and they will stay shallow. There'll be a whole group of fish that stay shallow all throughout the year. They live their entire lives that way. And if you've got a lake that really isn't, you know, suited for super deep water fishing, go fish some shallow water patterns. And more importantly, when you're out there fishing, kind of how I end every seminar is have fun. Fishing's a fun deal. I've been fortunate enough to, you know, be able to do this for a living now for 30 years. It's hard to believe in. You know, and I kind of still don't know anything, but, you know, just have fun out there fishing, and don't get caught up in what everybody else is doing and how everybody else is catching them. If you like to catch them a certain way, and that's fun for you, well, go ahead and do that, because you'll probably end up catching a ton of fish doing it. So thanks again to the guys at Navionics for hosting these seminars and you know, giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys. The great guys at Bass Pro Shops, again, for jumping in and hosting this thing. And if you guys want to interact with me, you can jump on Facebook and jump on my fan page. It's Mike DelVisco fan page. I do answer everybody's questions. Sometimes it takes me a little bit if I'm traveling or running around the country like I happen to be doing. But if you guys have questions on not only this stuff that we covered, but anything else that you might see, or have any questions on anything, feel free to send me a message and I will absolutely answer your questions. So with that, Paul, we'll turn it back over to you. And if we've got any specific questions, I'll try to address those.
All right, we'll take it from here. So we've taken a look at, as everybody I mentioned earlier, if you take a look down at the bottom, actually I think as a viewer, it might be off to the side, but you've got a little chat box there and you've got a Q&A. Feel free to click on either of those and I can ramble up your question. And as Mike said, he'll be happy to address it. Give everybody a little bit here. Hey, Mike, what do you find, you know, while we're waiting, give everybody a chance to type something, you know, on tidal rivers? You know, it's one area kind of like St. John's here, the tidal rivers. They're moving out, it's a deeper tidal river. You still find them kind of more when they're moving out of the coves, more in the, like in the creek channels there, or do you see them move in and out a little bit? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that they'll actually do both things. Now, the cool thing about tidal water is that that water moves. So there's not, you know, a lot of cases, you know, where the fish will do one specific thing. So, you know, say the Potomac River or St. John's or whatever, where that water moves, those fish will stay shallow a lot of times because it's prime feeding opportunities, and they can use that you know, that current to their advantage a lot of times to be able to set up and feed. So I'm going to look for, you know, a variety of things, and my natural instinct, on a river is to actually fish shallow, because that's where my strength lies, and that's probably going to be the first thing that I try to exploit, although I wouldn't put it past me going out and looking at some intermediate stuff, like for example, that if you think back on that slide that we saw with the hump that had a very sharp drop, that would be an awesome thing to find on a tidal body of water, especially if it was sort of set up in a way where the tide rolled over it and created an eddy on that drop. That would be something that, you know, for certain I would take a look at. And, you know, in tidal bodies of water, if I'm looking out deep or looking at deeper structures, that's what I'm looking at. It's going to be almost the very same thing as shallow water spots. using the cover to the fish's advantage to be able to set up and feed, as deep water places being able to them to use that deep water place to set up and feed as well.
Gotcha. All right. Well, if you've got any additional questions, as Mike had mentioned, feel free to jump on his fan page, friend him on Facebook, and shoot some messages over to Mike. Again, this webinar has been recorded, so please visit navionics.com or Bass Pro OneSource. And this will get posted usually in about 3 days. Just go to the main site. Again, take a look. Scroll down to the bottom. You'll see the hot link. Mike, want to thank you again for taking out some time to talk to everybody and give us some more tips, especially this time of year, and where to go catch more fish.
Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks, guys.
Mike, I will talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.